Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is part 2 of the making of The Empire Strikes Back. So if you haven't seen part 1, click the link so you can be all caught up. Then come back and watch this video later. But to recap, last time we discussed the early drafts of the scripts written by George Lucas and Leah Brackett. The story of the dark time of the rebellion was born, and the outline was strong, but the dialogue, the dialogue.
I don't like sand.
It needed to be fixed. So let's talk about the writer who came in and saved Empire Strikes Back. You're listening to Han Talks First.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Cue Lawrence Kasdan. Lawrence Kasdan, of course, now known as the person who has written the most Star Wars after George Lucas, came in and helped polish this script to be absolutely perfect. And of course, he's worked with George Lucas much more since thereafter. He worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark and Return of the Jedi, Force Awakens, Solo, a lot of stuff. He's also a director as well, so he understands actors and blocking and important things like that. So he decided to bring in Lawrence Kasdan, who had written some other stuff there, Lucas was a fan of, and that's why he picked him. And Lawrence Kasdan wrote all the drafts after the second one, and I think there was 3 more after this, and he wrote them all and really finished and tightened up this script. Lawrence Kasdan is actually the one who came up with the idea that Luke loses his hand in the climactic battle with Vader towards the end. He thought of it as a very symbolic approach to being disarmed, not only literally but metaphorically as well. Originally, his arm was going to be sliced off at the elbow. Another thing that Kasdan is most infamous for is he wrote the iconic lines of Yoda. Now, yes, George Lucas came up with the idea of backwards talk. All the dialogue in this film is really a credit to Lawrence Kasdan, and a lot of the story transitions and big plot elements are a credit to Leah Brackett, and of course the overall story is a credit to George Lucas. So it's amazing how 3 different people coming together and working on something really molded this story to what it was going to be today. Another thing that Lawrence Kasdan brought to the table was he wanted to come up with this race of alien grunt workers that we now know as Ugnaughts, and he wanted them to work on the Cloud City planet of Bespin. It's funny, we now know them as Ugnaughts, but Lawrence Kasdan wanted to call them Hogmen. And George Lucas just thought that wasn't alien enough, so they changed it to Ugnaughts, but I just think it's funny. So after completing many drafts of these scripts, George Lucas was, at this point, looking to find a director so that he could focus the majority of his time on his company. George Lucas did want to direct this second one, but it was just a matter of time. He just literally couldn't do it. He had so many things going on at one time that he just couldn't direct the film. So, I think we're all a little thankful that he couldn't do it because Irvin Kershner killed it. And we're going to talk about how they got there and everything else like that. But one of the reasons why George Lucas couldn't direct this film because, for one, his company was moving locations from Van Nuys to San Rafael. So that's a big thing when you're handling a company with employees and a bunch of tech and a lot of insurance issues. But another big thing was that they were building the technology for this next film and advancing the technologies they had used before and patenting those ideas. But I think the biggest thing that distracted Lucas from directing this film was that he was in the middle of a lawsuit with a company called Dixtera, which I think is a production company. And the producers of that company, because they were the producers of Battlestar Galactica. And George Lucas and company was considering Battlestar Galactica a ripoff of Star Wars at the time, and they were currently in a lawsuit. So that took up a lot of time as well. So we now know the director, Irvin Kershner, was picked by George Lucas because he was a former film instructor of his. But it's funny because he actually wasn't the first picked. He was considered from a wide range of other filmmakers before being approached to make The Empire Strikes Back. Alan Parker is an example, who's directed a film called Mississippi Burning. He also approached John Badman, who I would say most notably directed Dracula. George Lucas had a list of 100 names of directors he was going to ask. Irvin Kershner was in there somewhere, but I know he wasn't up at the top because he did ask these other two before. So George Lucas had a big list to go through. And a lot of the directors on this list declined because they thought making a sequel was a terrible idea. You know, at the time, sequels were awful. All sequels did terrible. It was a mistake, and it was like a common rule of thumb not to do them in Hollywood at the time. And there were also directors, Alan Parker and John Badman, for example, have quoted saying that the reason why they didn't want to make The Empire Strikes Back was because if it was bad, then the director was going to get all the blame for it. And if the movie was good, George Lucas was going to get all the credit for the film. Which we now know is fact. Yeah, that is true. You know, a lot of people didn't know Irvin Kershner's name for a while. And newcomers to Star Wars always just think George Lucas when they hear Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, or other films. Which is understandable. He of course, is the creator. But these directors had a point in what they were saying. So anyway, Irvin Kershner made the mark. George Lucas has said to this day that one of the biggest challenges for The Empire Strikes Back was, do you want to guess which the biggest challenge was, real quick? Go ahead and take a second and take a guess what the biggest challenge was. Okay, did you have time? Well, here's the answer. The biggest challenge to The Empire Strikes Back was getting Yoda right. Now, the puppet was made by Wendy Mittner and Stuart Freeborn. Now, looking at it now, it's kind of weird to think Yoda was the hardest part of that movie, but he's like the best part of that movie. He's so likable, and everyone loves Yoda. Everyone loves him because of all the work that was put into him. Wendy Mittner is the main architect of Yoda. Stuart Freeborn was her assistant. Now, when they were first commissioned with the task to make Yoda, their design instructions were that they were to make a pint-sized, green, 800-year-old Jedi Masters with features that emulated both Albert Einstein and Takashi Shimura. If you don't know who Takashi Shimura is, it's a character from Seven Samurai. And it actually didn't look anything like Takashi Shimura. It actually resembled more of the assistant to the puppet maker, which was Stuart. So it's kind of weird there, but yeah, Wendy actually modeled it after her assistant Stuart Freeborn a little bit more than Takashi, but there are elements of Albert Einstein in there. Now, another one of the hardest parts, I would say probably the hardest part, was finding the person to play Yoda, because it wasn't just about making the creature, it was about bringing that creature to life. And George Lucas had the idea of using little people or dwarfs as Yoda, and then when he decided he couldn't find an actor who was strong enough in their talents to play that character, then he started looking at children, and again had the same problem, couldn't find a child actor with the potential to bring to life that character, especially being a 900-year-old master Jedi. So he eventually went to Muppet Studio, and he found Frank Oz, who of course is one of the best parts of Star Wars. I mean, Yoda is everything he is because of Frank Oz. And Frank Oz was picked because he's a senior puppeteer at the Muppets studio at the time. He voiced Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear and Animal. But yeah, he did a lot of characters on the Muppets, and also a writer-director, voiced on The Dark Crystal, created The Dark Crystal, directed that. I love Dark Crystal. It's like my second thing to Star Wars is Dark Crystal. Absolutely amazing. But hiring Frank Oz was probably the wisest decision George Lucas could have made at the time. And Frank did a unique job. You know, it wasn't only a good job, it was a unique job playing Yoda. And he made it believable, and at the same time bringing surprisingly emotional richness to this character that has stuck with us all since small children to grown-ass adults. Now, the production of The Empire Strikes Back was starting to come to life after the final drafts of the script were being turned in by Lawrence Kasdan. But the problem was the script was very ambitious, as George Lucas had originally intended from the first draft he made. It was so ambitious and so large that no studio at the time could actually house its scale for production. No one had the amount of studio space to make all these sets, to accommodate all the crew, and to build these huge worlds and these environments that George Lucas was trying to make. So George Lucas actually had to, hire his own construction company to create a new oversized soundstage to be built with customized specifications. They had a lot new technology that they were introducing into the filmmaking world, and a lot of the sound stages at the time couldn't be adept to that. So they had to make everything from scratch. So they did use a bunch of studios in some in LA, and then also some in Europe, but most of the shooting was done in London on the IMP, I think is what they were called, IMP Studios, and also the ones that George Lucas himself were commissioning to build. Now, all of this made, with the new advancements in technology and building the studio sound stages, this all contributed to the fact that this movie was going so far over budget and super exceeding the first film's budget. There's no exact number out there, but it went at least $10 million over budget. In 5 months alone, the film was at one point at $15 million, and only a couple months later, it skyrocketed up to $21.5 million. Mainly because of this new sound studio and all the tech they were building for this stuff. It's crazy. And The Empire Strikes Back proved to be a success. It went on to be one of the greatest movies of all time, and one of the most beloved by fans everywhere. And that's all I have for you today on the making of The Empire Strikes Back. If you would like a part 3, please tell me in the comments. There's so much more to the story, but for now, this is all. So subscribe to the channel because you don't want to miss the videos of the making of Return of the Jedi coming next week. And until then, if you haven't seen the making of A New Hope, that is also linked below. Give this video a like to support the show, and leave some love in the comments for me. And now somehow, someway, somewhere this week, my friends, may the Force be with you.